Paul Roos here from Performance by Design, and welcome to the Culture Couch with my partner in crime, Gerard Murphy. G'day, Murph.
G'day, Roosy. How are you?
Very exciting interview today with the great Neil Balme. Now, for those of you who don't know Balmey's journey, which we're going to go through in great detail, but quickly, Balmey, give us a little bit of a snapshot before we get into those hard-hitting questions.
So where am I from? This is going to take a while because I've been around forever. I started playing footy in Perth way back in 1968, which is a long time ago, and I was only a 16-year-old kid, but I was lucky enough to be at the Subi Footy Club when Hayden Bunton Jr. had first started, and really helped me enormously. And I was a skinny young kid, but I actually played some senior footy in the Waffle, and I did play a game against the great Polly Farmer one day. I didn't get the ball that often, obviously. He was the coach of West Perth, and but I can still see that and smell that day. It was obviously growing up as a kid. He was one of the people that we admired so much. And I was lucky enough later on when I played in the first ever State of Origin game in '77, and Polly was coach, so I had a fair bit to do with him then. So it was fantastic. And then after that, obviously his relationship with Geelong, I saw him a little bit after that as well. But so that was early. But then my dad was transferred to Melbourne in his job, so we hadn't really thought anything about my footy life. I was still going to school, obviously, and came to Melbourne, and we lucky enough to be recruited by the Richmond Footy Club, which was a wonderful time. It was in '69 onwards. Was there for 10, 11 years and had a lovely time. And in those days, there wasn't an enormous amount of money around. And I remember Alan Schwab, who was then the secretary, came to me and said, look, our blokes are going to the Gold Coast next week for a week for a bit of a training camp. It'll also be a bit of fun. If you sign, you can come. So I was a pretty cheap get, I reckon. But it was good fun. I remember we stayed in Cavill Avenue, and it was certainly a bit of fun. I was under the drinking age, but I think I might have sneaked a couple of beers in at the time.
The senior players showed you the ropes.
I turned 17 up there, I think, or 70. So that was good fun. Then I was lucky enough to play for there. It was a wonderful organisation, good fun, great mates. Played for 10 years of senior footy. Unfortunately, I finished early with some crook knees. I couldn't run in the end. I was only 27 when I finished playing, which was a bit of a disappointment. But then I was lucky enough, in those days I had a real job as well as playing footy. Worked for a company called Renown and Pearlade, who were part of the Amcor Group packaging firm, and worked with some great people. And it was a bit of a footy field. Doug Hayward was the CEO, and Bobby Skilton worked there. Roy Wright was the sales manager. We worked with Len Thompson for a while, and I think Kenny Hunter and Teddy Whitten Jr. And so it was, and even remember Reg Gasnier, the great rugby player. He worked for us in Sydney, so it was always. And Trevor Allen, another guy.
Would have been a lot of work going on.
Oh, no, it was. We were very serious about it. It was actually a very successful business and good fun. But I'm not quite sure why the footy thing drove it, but it did drive it pretty well. But anyway, so I was lucky enough when I was appointed to coach the Norwood Footy Club in Adelaide as a reasonable young bloke in 1980. And obviously it's a part-time job, but I went to Adelaide and Renown kept me on, and I started a sales office, and we finished up having a factory and a pretty successful business there as well as coaching footy. So it was a busy time, but I really, in some ways, I feel a bit for today's players because they don't get the opportunity to have the commercial experience as I did. So it was really good fun, and coaching was something I really enjoyed. The Norwood Footy Club were one of the traditional footy clubs in the world. Lovely, still love them. Fantastic stuff. Then I coached Woodville West Torrens when they came together in 91 and 92, and then in the end was lucky enough to be appointed to Melbourne Footy Club to coach them, and was there for 4 or 5 years. And it was a bit unpleasant in the end. We ran out of players and ran out of purpose in lots of ways. So it was a really challenging time, but I still remember it very fondly. It was the players, my relationship with the players was always terrific. Really enjoyed that. And then after that, I was able to move into, because of my commercial background, into footy management. So I worked with Collingwood from 99 for 8 years with all those guys, including Mick Malthouse, who I'd played a fair bit with. So that was good fun. And then lucky enough to get a job at Geelong in 2007 and worked there for 8 years. And, it was a wonderful experience. Great people, good fun. A few people that I worked with that were a little bit hard to control, but you.
Oh, so it's about you.
Exactly. But that was good fun. And then Made the choice to go back to Collingwood for a couple of years. I particularly wanted to help Bucks do what he's doing. I think he's doing a great job. I think I didn't perhaps help him as much as I could have. And then I was lucky enough to fall into going back to Richmond in 2017 and been there now for 3 years. And it's been, you sort of, I mean, you would feel it yourself a bit when you actually go to your footy home. You go, oh, this is where I should be. And I always try not to be too emotional about him and decision makings, but it's been fantastic, really. And we've had a wonderful 3 years, so it's has been good fun. So my footy life hasn't finished yet, but it's been pretty big.
It's been successful, Balmey. I was going through your bio before we started. 2 premierships as a player. Yep. 3 at Geelong.
Yep.
And another 2 at Richmond, and still going. So it's an amazingly successful career over a long period of time.
Yeah, funnily enough, people say to me, how many premierships have you been involved with? And it sounds like a bit of a throwaway line, but I say, well, the last one. Because you blokes know as well as I do that the involvement, it's about now. Yeah. It's not about what's happened before. That put that aside. Well, going forward, what's next? What are we going to do? So even in today's world, which is there's so much uncertainty about it, and when the thing in the back of our mind is, how the hell are we going to make the most out of 2020 if we get to play? Yeah. And that's what you've got to be thinking. So,
But you've got an incredible wealth of knowledge to that point, Murph. It's amazing. And football is so progressive. And I think today is about really tapping into that knowledge. But starting back where it first started, because, I mean, I learned about culture probably similar to what you did. I mean, I went to Fitzroy, you went to Richmond. Tell us about, as a 16, 17-year-old kid walking into an iconic football club like Richmond coming from Perth, and what did it look like back then?
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't think if we built our team now on what they did then, I'm not sure that it'd work, because we were much more likely then to be told what to do and just bloody do it, and if you don't, you get the arse sort of thing. Which I can see how that was necessary at the time, but it certainly doesn't work now.
No.
But there were some wonderful people. If you look at Tommy Hafey, I mean, he's sort of criticised at times for not being strategic enough and da-da-da-da-da. But that was because what he believed in. Yeah. This is his game.
Yeah.
And you know what? Even me, like, I was a little bit of a larrikin. I was a bit of a drinker. I even smoked. Can you believe I smoked? God. And Tommy was very much the fitness fanatic and ran all the time, swam all the time, and never drank and never smoked and all those things. But I know he trusted me as a player. You know what I mean? And that's what he was. Yeah. He believed in his people. And so I knew that, and I didn't always do everything right. I didn't train as well as he'd like. I've actually got an old letter from him saying, stop being a bloody party boy and get serious and you'll be all right, sort of thing. So it was always there, and always sort of pushing back a little bit on that because you want your own personality to come through. But I knew that he had my back. I knew that he believed in me, and I knew that he expected me to play well. And if you look back at my playing career, I probably played better in finals than I did in regular games, more so because I think you just knew you had to, because he needed you to do it, and you needed to repay the trust that he had for you. So if you look at Tommy, you wouldn't probably on the surface think that that's what he was. He's today's coach in his way. He's a player's coach.
Yeah.
Because players genuinely played for him, and even though he probably didn't have that much in common with a lot of them because of his nature, there was a really strong bond between him and the players, and I think that was the thing that held that place together. And everyone from the Mad Sheedy to the wonderful Royce to KB, who was they call him a selfish player, but he was great to play with because you knew he was doing his best every time he was at it. And then there's some other more intelligent blokes who had to think, like Mike Green. He gave it away for a year because he had to work, but we convinced him to come back. So it was a really big balance of different sorts of people, all finding their own. And Barry Richardson, even, who has a lot of influence over the place.
And who took you under their wing? And was this a sort of like a group of senior players that were almost like what we would call a leadership group today?
But it was a little bit different because the ones you'd look to be the leadership players, like the Francis Burkes and probably even the Sheedys and the Bartletts and maybe even Royce, who was a little closer to all of us. So that they were a little bit not removed, But it was that next group that had the power in its own way. You know, the Robbie McGee's and the Ricky McLeans and Ian Stewart and Barry Richardson, and we were all really close. Brian Roberts and Craig McKellar. There's lots of them, but we were really very close, and we were doing probably some of the stuff you're not supposed to do, like go to the pub after training, have a couple of beers. But it was all about being together and working for each other, and we probably could have been better players if we drank a little bit less beer, but I don't think so, because that was part of who we were and how we worked together. And we had enormous respect for Berkey and Sheeds and but they were almost on a different level in a funny way. It was so it was an interesting. If you sat back and tried to do an objective look at what the leadership was like, it was really quite unusual. But it was all very much about all this. We had the same purpose. We were going to win. We were going to do as much as we could. We were responsible to each other.
What pulled the group together? Because it sounds like there was a lot of different personalities, and you sort of got your drinkers and larrikins, and then you got your sort of your workers, and then you've got potentially the Sheeds and KB. What was the one purpose that pulled everything together?
I think for some reason we believed in the Richmond story.
Yeah.
And I don't know why we did, but we did. Yeah. And there was, we're here, and bugger everyone else, we're going to make sure we're the best. Now, we weren't necessarily the best, but we did our best. It's interesting. And there's the influence of, say, like a Graham Richmond, which is often talked about. And he had enormous influence. He had a lot to do with putting the best team together. But in a lot of ways, it was kind of contrary to what you need to do to drive everyone, because he was prepared to make the nasty decision of shooting people or getting people out of the joint. And in the end, that probably hurt the club significantly, because it from 85 onwards for a long time, they were bloody terrible.
Yeah, because they win 4 premierships in that period?
Yeah, 67, 69. 73, 74, then 80.
Yeah. And,
so 5, really.
Then they fell off the perch.
Francis played in 5, for example.
Okay.
KD played in 5, yeah.
So they've won those and they've just dropped off. So from a cultural perspective...
Yeah, I often look at it and I say, from 67 to 82, we've finished top 4 10 times, won 5 premierships, wonderful club. But then from 82 to 89, in 7 years, we are buggered. There was Rattle the Tins, Save the Tiger Fund. It was what we went from that to, and it was a bit of a change in culture that we probably didn't see coming. But I think my feeling is that footy is all about people. All you got is people. And if you don't treat your people properly, you'll lose them. So I think, not meaning to, but I think we demanded total loyalty from all our people and all our players and all our staff, but we didn't give much back, because they went through that time when, Clokey and Rainsy and Woody and whoever, they're all gone. They all go
did it
because
become more of a business then? Is it? When you look back on it, because they're great.
I think it probably did, but we didn't. But I think we fined the players in a way for asking for something.
Yeah.
Like all the clubs in the world, they might say to Clokey, I don't know about the numbers, but you're on 20 grand, we're going to give you 50 grand. So Clokey comes in and says, well, what am I going to do with this? And I get the feeling we told him, don't be so friggin' selfish, just take your 20 and play, which is not, maybe that's a reasonable thing to say, but it's not going to win in those days, because that's when the money started to be part of it. As you said, it became more of a business than just a game. And I think they lost out on a few of those things. And then someone like a Rainsy, for example, he could have been nearly the best player ever to play at our club, but he goes away and is not doesn't play quite as well at Collingwood, Brisbane or whatever, as he could have, probably because he wasn't as engaged as he had been. But if we had just worked a bit harder at it, because I think we recruited, and I wasn't there at the time, we recruited in Maurice Rioli, and I think we must have been paying him a heap of dough, and Rainsy said, well, I need to get something more, and I think we said too bad. Which is a terrible decision. Really.
It's worth reflecting on that era, isn't it? Because it's funny, there's way more money involved in footy now, but money had way more impact back then. I remember when I was playing, I remember the South Australians, we were driving around in Supras and SS Commodores, and they'd be getting sign-on fees and all that sort of stuff. So that era, and Ronnie Joseph when he went to North Melbourne, and Doug Wade and all that sort of stuff. So it was probably the first era of the big impact that money had. And as I said, I think it had more impact back then than potentially what it does then. Is that because we were naive and it just sort of crept up on everyone?
Oh, I think it's probably true, but we didn't handle it the way we should. I think what we know now is that if you recruit just on the basis of dollars and don't treat your other players, current players properly, you're going to suffer.
Yeah.
And you should, because we talk about equality and everyone doing their best and we'll treat you properly and and then you don't. Well, from a leadership point of view, you're not doing what you say you're going to do.
Yeah.
And particularly in today's world, you're in deep trouble, aren't you? Because you go, oh shit. So it's probably the lessons we learned from it. You can't make a one-off decision and spend all that money on a player, and then when the other bloke comes in, you say, too bad, so sad, and expect him to be as engaged as you were. Well, I don't think you can.
No, absolutely.
But they're the hard decisions you make in footy. We sort of had it even at Richmond when Essendon, Dan Richardson went to Essendon and he loved what some of our coaches do. So he said, look, I reckon Ben Rutten's a good player, a good coach to talk to. And, that's fine too. We're happy, not necessarily happy with it, but accepting of it. So he comes to us and they've offered him a bit more dough. And so, but what our problem was, particularly in the era of the soft cap, which I don't agree with at all, but we have to deal with it, is that, so we've got Rutten, Lepich, Blake, Carousel or whatever, and we've sort of told them that they're on a similar level, they are just as responsible within the program, and we'll treat them that way. And then all of a sudden Ben comes and said, I've been offered a heap more dough, what do I do? We said, we can't offer you a penny more, because we have to, if we offer you anything, we've got to do him, and we can't afford to do it. And we had to make that decision. And in the old days, they would say, oh, don't worry about it, just do it. But that would be wrong, because eventually you're going to say, and the same thing happened, or they came for Blake after that, and we said, oh, we're still in the same boat, we're going to lose them both. But that in itself is okay, because we don't mind our blokes developing, opportunity comes, and you have to be, broad enough to accept all that. But it's a similar thing, you've got to make your decision based on that, and that's what we probably didn't do in those days.
Yeah, and I think there was plenty of brown paper bags floating around back then too, wasn't there?
Yeah, sadly I didn't see any of that.
But when you the lessons you took then, and as you said, you're a young coach, 27, going
that's right.
going to South Australia. So what did you learn? Had you formulated a plan through your playing days as to how you'd be a coach, or did you sort of just take a leap of faith and say, I'm going to be a coach, and then I'll work at it as we go through?
Well, funnily enough, I'd not really thought about it much because I was reasonably young and still playing, hoping you're going to play. So obviously I'd thought a lot about footy, but I hadn't thought about, well, what am I going to coach them? And particularly, I was lucky that Barry Richardson coached me for a couple of years, and we were quite close personally. So I went through the process with him a lot when it was happening. And so much of it was just, okay, what's going on? What do we do to change it? It was more what you do about that rather than, and he reset our game plan a bit. He encouraged us to use the ball a bit more, and because Tommy was very much a kick it long type.
But it was still very much about the X's and O's, wasn't it? Because to your point before, everyone was working during the day. So I talk about a lot. There wasn't a lot of time for what we talk about now, building relationships, self-awareness, empathy, vulnerability, et cetera, et cetera. So it was more about the X's and O's of the games, really. Yeah,
well, funnily enough, I think back to it, and I think a lot of it was my ability to actually try and learn something, because in those days, SA footy was a bit different to Melbourne footy. Same sort of outcomes, but they treated it differently. I mean, Jack Odie had been he'd coached 6 premierships in a row, so what Jack did was the way. Yeah. And he was very much about thinking about the game and using the ball a bit more and all that sort of stuff. So I think the advantage I had in the end was I went to Nord and I said to them, how do we play? What do we do? What should I know? I'm asking them rather than coming in and saying, just kick it along. This is what Tommy did. Because I'd never quite.
So you remember having that conversation with the players?
I did. And luckily enough, a guy called Wally Miller was the footy manager and was fantastic, enormous footy influence and great person. And he helped me enormously. And so did, there's a mad bastard called John Wynn who played with him, who I used to watch when he played for West Perth in the old days. And he was a really smart footy guy and was around the club all the time. And he really helped me and a couple of other players. Ian Stasnowski was an older player, and then Michael Taylor was our captain then, and another guy, Phil Gallagher, and quite a few others. They were really helpful to me. But I reached out to them. I said, well, explain it. Tell me, what do you do? How do we? And so I probably coached the way they wanted me to coach in terms of the game, which probably
Which
helped.
would have been unusual back then to actually engage your players.
Yeah, I think it was. I think it was. But that was the way I am anyway. So I needed to do that. I could, I didn't want to just walk in and say, rah, 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 do what you're told. Because as a person, I hate sitting back waiting for someone to tell me what to do and then go and do it. Is that a reasonable assessment of me?
Fair assessment.
So I don't like other people to have to do that either. So, whilst there was a lot of direction in what we did, and I did coach strongly enough, but I wanted to know how they wanted to play and what was right and wrong. And so I got to learn the SA game in a sense, and then was able to coach it. And it took a little while. We lost the first 3 games, so I thought I'm not going to last too long here. But we played off in the first year we played in the grand finals.
And you brought that philosophy to Melbourne as well, didn't you? I remember I was working in the marketing department at that time, and so I was pretty close to the club, and the feeling that Balmey as a coach was that he was a players' coach. He invited the players in and asked them what they thought.
Well, my view of it is that it ultimately doesn't matter a rat's ass what I know, because when the ball's to be picked up, the player has to know. I mean, my line is that the player going for the ball is CEO. Like if he picks it up and handballs it to someone, all of a sudden, we're going to be successful. But if he can't do what he does, that's the wonderful part of our game, is that there's so much. The players can take so much responsibility if they want to, if they really want it. So always, as a coach, it doesn't really matter what you know. It matters what they get.
Yeah. I think it's fascinating too, the way you talk about it, because for those who don't know Neil as a player, you probably, if you had taken the stereotypical the way you played as a hard, tough player, you would have automatically thought, Murph, that he would have been a hard, tough coach. So do you think that was innate in you to lean on the others, or was that your natural personality away from training and football, or did you learn that through the process?
Well, I think as a player, I did what I felt I had to do for us to win. I've always been a kind of a team first by nature, so that's probably what I did. But for example, I've never ever looked like having a fight off on the street.
That's what I'm getting at. I guess your natural personality.
That's not me. I think I'm strong enough and believe in myself and all that sort of stuff. But I'm not violent at all, no, or even aggressive in a way. But as a player, that's what we needed to do. I mean, I felt that's what we needed to do to impose ourselves, because there was a fair bit of intimidation back when I played in those days. And when I look at it, I'm sort of like a bit embarrassed about it at times. But you go, well, that's whatever happens, happens. I mean, a lot of things have happened, and you just get on with it. And fortunately, if I run into Jeff Southby, he talks to me and says hello, he realises. And Dave Mackay was another one that I probably did a couple of things too, and we worked a bit together on the ABC. And he's very, very funny. And I think we all understood a bit in those days that sometimes that stuff happens, but it wasn't going to kill you. It was just part of the game, I think.
So at Melbourne, when you look back at the coaching career, what went really well, and then what do you think you could have done better?
Yeah, we were pretty good in, what year was it? 94 from memory. Yeah. I thought we played pretty well, and I was criticised later on for having the wrong style of play, which is fair enough, I suppose. But we just ran out of players. We had some terrible bad luck with injuries. So like Gary, who was such an influential player, Gary Lyon, he had a crook back and missed a lot of footy. Schwarter was Carey-esque in my view, and I was really that proud of him when he came back and played after. But like for the 5 years I'm there, he only played 1.5 or something. And he was, if anyone can remember those finals in '94 when we played Carlton one day, and I thought he was a ballet dancer at one stage. He's spinning around, played on Peter Dean, and we played a game against the last game of the season in '94 in Sydney, and we had to beat Sydney to make sure we made the finals, which should have happened or whatever. So it's reasonably tight the first quarter. I sent a message down to Schwarter to say, come on, mate, we need something more. We won't be here next week if we don't, do something. And I got down to the group at quarter time, and he's avoiding me. I said, what's the go? He said, you told me I'm not playing next week. I said, no. I said, we won't be playing next week. So he turned it around. I think he kicked 9 from centre forward from memory. Oh, God, he could play. So we had a lot of, and even, I think Toddy Viney shot through and coached some bloody tennis player. So it was, that limited us a fair bit. But I mean, the end, it's a hard job. And the club was going through all sorts of other crazy things as well at the time. So it's pretty easy to see, well, let's get rid of him and start again. But I don't know. I haven't really sat back and analysed much what I'd do differently or not, because I've never. I spoke to a couple of clubs after that, and they appointed coaches who I thought were not good appointments above me, and I thought my name is poisoned here. I'm not going for any coaching jobs. I'll do something else.
So you went into admin?
Yeah, well, which was the best thing I ever did in lots of ways. I was very lucky to get the opportunity, but I think it suits me as well. I mean, we know how mad you have to be to be a coach in a way, and I wasn't maybe quite mad enough in some ways, but yeah, you have to be really on edge a lot of the time, don't you? But
It's interesting because as being in the industry, obviously I have, you always had a great reputation from the players. So it surprises me that you didn't get another job, but you were almost ahead of your time a little bit. And I say that respectfully because now a coach like yourself, that's what people are crying out for, Murph, and you can weigh on this as well. But you were a bit ahead of your time, because whenever I ran into a player that was coached by us, I said, what's Balmey expecting to say? Oh, he's a hard ass and he yells at us all the time and he's really tough. And it was always about, he's a great people person. He really looks after the players. So do you think you were a little bit ahead of your time in
it may be too. I mean, that's why that's the challenge that footy's got now. We're all talking about reducing soft caps and we spend too much money and all that sort of stuff. I think we're getting that wrong a little bit. We need to support our players. So when I was coach, I'm sort of the coach, and I think it was Felix was Peter Russo was the assistant, Jonesy did this, Griffo was doing it, but we're no people. Yeah. So you haven't got enough of that support, so that's why the coach like I was, that you needed probably to be a bit more direct, maybe,
because it was hard to get around all the players. Definitely.
So maybe that's the case. So I think we've got to be a little bit careful about reducing our numbers like the AFL want us to. And not that this is a negative to the AFL, and I understand the enormous challenge they've got, but I think we're looking at today's problems too much through an accounting lens. So I think the AFL, they're going to change the name to the Accounting Football League or the F to Finance in a way. And I understand kind of why they do, but I think, if you understand, and I don't particularly, but I've got a bit of an understanding of Keynesian economics, it says when you're under pressure, you spend, you don't pull back. Yeah. Because if you pull back, you're really saying the inevitability is we're going backwards. Yeah. But if you invest in it, people might invest themselves and you might get through. And I think that's what we should be doing. But I don't pretend to know it all, and they have got an enormous challenge. But I think they're looking at it too much through the negative view and an accounting view. But that's again only my opinion. Less than humble, of course.
Well, if we jump forward, and we might come back to that, because that'll I guess it'll sort of tidy up at the end where football is now. But if we jump back, you went as football manager to Collingwood.
Yeah.
And then
when Shorey was coaching.
Yeah. And that was a difficult time as well.
Oh yeah, they were struggling a bit that year, but we had a lot of fun. They were good and was a good attitude. Yeah. But they were always going to grow. Some of them, they're such a powerful club. They're always going to get to some point. And then Shorey gave it away, and we appointed Mick, who did a fantastic job for a long time. And they just kept. You look back to it, and we were last, and I think we were overspending the salary cap. I won't go into why that happened. So we weren't all that well managed at that point, I didn't think. But we got a lot better as we went along. And it was interesting, if you look at the influence of people, Eddie had just come on as the president in those days. And his work in selling the club and promoting the club and getting it back into a strong financial position was really quite outstanding. They owe a hell of a lot to him for that, I must admit.
And then you turned up at Geelong, and that's probably where you and I...
Yes. So that was one of the lucky things in the world to fluke getting that job.
Yeah.
And
And
that was wonderful. Yeah.
When you walked in, because they were in a bit of trouble too at that point.
Well, I think they had been, but I reckon they'd resolved quite a bit of it, because I remember Steve Hocking and I were working together with at that stage, and I went to Steve after I'd been there for a few weeks and I said, am I kidding myself? Or we look like we're going to be pretty good here. And he
So
said,
what year was that, Balmey? Just a
7, started the end of 6, started
Yep.
7. Yeah.
Yep.
And he said, no, I think, you know.
So 6 was the year they had the review, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sick.
yeah.
Yeah.
They struggled in 6 and had a review, and obviously felt they needed to do something in the footy management, which luckily I fell into it. But it was really good. And even, you know, if people ask me a lot about Bomber, because, you know, it's well documented that he's sort of, you know, he's had a few issues or whatever, but he was fantastic for us. He was him, and he was kind of in charge in a way, which in the old days the coaches wanted to be that. But he was terrific to work with. Never a problem of whether he was there or not. I often heard when he went back to Essendon, they used to have to go and pick him up to take him to whatever. It was never an issue. He was very strong, very reliable, terrific with the players. Yep. Probably over the top in some ways in driving them, but really very, very strong. I really enjoyed working with him. He was very good.
So when you look at that period, and Murph, you can jump in any time, but what were the key moments for you? You've come in at the end of 2006. I think it was Cookie did the review, Murph, and
well, again, Cookie was outstanding to work for. He's one of the people that I really admire in footy, and again, just on that, the challenge for management in footy this year has been as big as ever, and I'm really impressed with what Brendan has been able to do as well. Brendan Gale's been able to do, because they've got all the hard decisions to make, but they've got to stay empathetic. They've got to stay strong with it, but they still have to be able to say, well, okay, what is the direction? And Cookie was always good at that, and I think Brendan's really shown the way also. It's been terrific, because leadership is how you deal with the power you've got. Because when you're in the position of leadership, you can kind of do what you like. You're powerful.
We can see that around the world at the
Well, you
moment.
do, but if you have a stronger test on yourself than you do on your people, you are, in my view, you're the leader that we want. And I think both of those guys reflect that.
And you and I have both read the Narrow Road to the Deep North.
Yes, we have.
And I remember having quite a philosophical conversation with you about the duty of leadership.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
So, and it's probably what you're sort of alluding to, is the main character is based loosely on Weary Dunlop. In the book. Yeah,
and the way it's written, that he's not perfect at all things, but by hell, he's very reliable when the pressure's on. Yeah. It was wonderful. I would say, that's kind of the way I see life as well. Yeah. I mean, you don't have to be perfect, but when the pressure's on and when the crunch comes, are you thinking about you or you thinking about us? And if they're thinking about us, it's a great
way to look at leadership. Do what's best for yourself, and do what's best for the team. If you were to write down through that period 5 to 6 moments or points that allowed Geelong to get into that successful era, when you look back on it, what would some of those be?
I kind of don't think of it in those terms much. I should.
I give you one.
I do. Yeah.
When Stephen Johnson.
Yes, that's good. Yeah, it's a great example.
Over Christmas.
Great example.
I rang Balmey.
Yep.
And I remember I was standing on the back porch. I remember where I was standing at the time, and said, "Will you let the leadership group handle this?" And I wasn't sure what he was going to say, but I knew that if he said no, I was pretty much done. And I'm only 2 months into a job, really.
Yeah, that's right.
And he said, "Absolutely, I'd love them to do it, and I'm sure Mark will support it." And at that point, I went, "Okay, I reckon I remember half a chance."
Tommy Harley, who's a friend of all of ours, I knew his mum and dad in Adelaide, would you believe? Man, they all support us. I remember Tommy coming in. I said, "Well, what are we going to do with Jono?" And you have to swear to say, "Well, fuck Jono. I'm sick of him. He says he's going to do all this stuff and doesn't do it."
So this is your response?
No, this is Tommy's.
Tommy's response.
Tommy's.
Yeah.
Oh, shit. And then he said, "But what are we going to do with it?" Like, we've got to get an impact out of this, because he's so important to us when he's good, but he's so negative when he's not. What the hell do we do? And that's when they came up with a really kind of challenging thing for him. Like, he's not allowed to train with us until round 5 or something. Yeah. And fortunately, a lot of people read it all and they helped him. Like, I think Nigel helped him and made sure that he felt that this has to happen, but you'll be right. And he came through it pretty well. But it was really, but we had to let the leadership, well, that was the challenge of, do we care about the player leadership here? Do we want to take advantage of what they can do? If we do, there's a price to pay. We have to hand something to them. That's always been in my nature to do it. And fortunately, Balmey was prepared to buy into it as well. I mean, one of the really telling moments, so that year we'd won what? We'd lost twice, hadn't we? We got beaten.
2 and 3.
Yeah, 2 and 3. And we'd just been beaten by North down at Geelong. And how the hell did that happen? What are we doing? We think we're better than that. And we have the classic, okay, players come in, Murph runs the program. So we're all saying, okay, what's happening? So they're all saying, this is Geelong. This always happens to us. We lose when we shouldn't lose. We should be better than that. But it just always happens. And we're both looking at each other going, what are these idiots talking about? And so we're sort of trying to lead them to the outcome. And then finally, Murph sort of saying, well, okay, so what can we do about it? Like, who can actually do something about this? What do you think? And it was marvellous. Corey Enright, who didn't say much because he'd sit next to Milburn and Scarlett, let them do all the talking, didn't say anything for 3 years, I reckon. And then, but this one he did. He sat there, he said, I think I know what you mean. I think you mean I can do something about it. And everyone goes, oh. And Murph said, hallelujah. Yes, that's what we mean. What? And everyone sort of all of a sudden got it. Oh, shit. So then we prepare that week. We're playing Richmond at whatever it was called then, Telstra Dome, what it was called then. And then we've prepared to be as miserable and negative and defensive and hard to play against and just make it hard for them to play well against Richmond. We kicked 35 goals.
And this is a true story.
That was a huge turning point.
I don't know if I've ever told anyone this. I was driving to the ground and I rang you as I was driving in and I said, Neil, how do you feel? And you said, I'm not that confident. And I said, I feel sick. And I said, Balmey, if we lose today, I've got nothing else.
We're all dead,
We're
aren't we?
done.
So what do you think happened on that day to the players?
I still remember them walking out of that meeting and they didn't say anything.
Yeah.
It was honestly like, as they walked out, they were in total silence. And I was thinking to myself, are these guys just...
We've either put everyone off or on.
They've either clicked or they haven't. Yeah. But there was something different as they walked out.
They were wonderful.
And from that day on, they just took it on.
Yeah.
They literally took it on. And it was...
Actually, there's some really quite interesting stories about all that. And that was, and then we were fantastic for the rest of the year. It was very powerful. And then the control of men in that, it's a really interesting sort of exercise. Because then through 8, we're the best team in 8, I reckon, by a mile. And we're playing Hawthorn in the grand final. It's all going to happen. And when you give people the right to make decisions and lead the way, there's sometimes a price to pay for that. So these guys, all our blokes, they are on top of the world. They're driving the world. And all of a sudden, Cam Mooney is one of the really good guys. He's interviewed that week. Well, what about this? Well, you're in the grand final again. What do you think? And he said, last year was for the fans. This year's for us. And we're going, nuts. So what do you mean with that? Well, that. And what's happened is the players have all got together and arranged the biggest piss-up of all time after the game in the rooms, invited who they wanted to invite. And we've sort of got... We're paying for it, and we've sort of got the sniff of it, and we're going, oh, God, I remember talking to Steve and to Murph and saying, what the hell do we do with this? And we felt that it had got to the point where we couldn't actually intervene, or we could have, but if we intervened and didn't win, we're making it worse. But we think we will get through and then we'll deal with it. But so as it turns out, we get beaten when we shouldn't, and they have the piss up, and it's a shocking thing. And we're able then to come back and say, okay, let's deal with this. And we did. And I don't reckon there was any hope that we could win in 9 if we had won 8, because we'd have lost control, wouldn't we? And
I think
it was very interesting.
Well,
and they're all good guys. They're blokes who are driving were, like Matty Scarlett. You couldn't get better, stronger people. I mean, James Kelly, really intelligent, bright guys. And Chappie and all. They're all
Jimmy,
driving it.
Gary.
Yeah.
No. Joel.
But that's the point of the whole exercise, isn't it? I mean, there's this notion of empowerment is you just let them go. But it is when do you step in and when you pull back. Because it's not as simple as just creating a set of behaviours and saying, guys, here it is.
Well, ultimately it is. It's the imposition of the adherence to what you agree to as how you're going to behave, and that is, which they weren't quite doing.
They weren't quite
and
doing
we were able to cut. It wasn't us saying you've done the wrong thing. We were saying, okay, how do you think that was
but when do
related
you jump
to humility?
in?
And, well, unfortunately, we probably let it get too far down the track in a way without discussing it. That was our weakness in it, in a way. But anyway, it happened.
But it's also a test is also when there's the most pressure on.
Yeah, well, that's right.
Do you trust or do you pull it back?
Yeah.
And too often we see CEOs, coaches say, no, the moment's too big.
Yeah.
I'm going to take it back, and no one ever learns anything.
No, that's true.
But I've found too, it's interesting because it's not either or, isn't it? Often it's just the discussion. Often it's, guys, are you doing the right thing? Do you think we should organise a piss up after the grand final? It's not necessarily imposing your will on them.
No, that's right.
It's actually just getting them to question it.
Relating to what you...
Exactly. These are the behaviours, guys. You've set up the piss up. Because I think sometimes we do either or rather than just asking a question and saying through the question, let them make the decision. Over that journey, tell us about Balmey. You touched on Balmey before. How did he handle Murph, and how did that relationship go?
He had his own ideas and was very strong. He knew what they wanted him to do, but he was terrific, I thought.
One of Mark's greatest strengths is he's an introvert and he listened. So. And on top of that, he's got an amazing football brain.
Yeah, but he knew our message, or your message was his message.
Yes.
Anyway, so it was only if we were promoting something else, he would have soon put his hand up.
And he always listened to the players.
Yes, he did. Yeah.
And at the end of it, he'd just sum up really quickly what they'd said. It's like, okay, bang, we're going to do this. Like, I remember him saying, for example, okay, how do you want to play the game? All right, great. You want to play like this? Fantastic. And it was an attacking game. Will that make you proud? Yes. And are we in? And it was like, it was a fantastic moment where you see him empower the group to decide how they want to play. They say this is how it's going to be, and he then went and drove that.
He was a very good coach.
And he had an amazing feel for momentum in the game. I still remember sitting in the coach's box, and Bomber would say, "What's going on there? There's something wrong." And he could pick up momentum before anyone else could.
Yeah, that's it. Well, you know it better than anyone. But so that's the big challenge. That's the one of the things that I'm so proud of what Richmond did this year, is that the hard thing in a game, when things aren't quite working, can you impact it during the game? You can always do it for next week, but it's too late. So if you looked at the last half a dozen games that Richmond played last year. There was the West Coast game, the Geelong game, the two Brisbane games, even where the game had gone slightly awry, and they were able to adjust by more people in or more people out, or whatever the simplicity is. But they'd practiced enough and were able to see it, and the players were able to get what they were asked to do.
So that was on field?
Yeah. Well, driven by the coaches. Or the coach, and then it became the on-field.
But it's also set up, to your point, isn't it? It's hard to do that if you don't have trust in the players.
Well, that's right.
It's hard to do that if you haven't empowered the players. They don't have trust in the coaching staff, because the danger in that moment is the message comes down and then the players go, why doesn't he trust us? So if you haven't built that trust during the week or pre-season, it's very hard to do that. And so leaving Geelong and going back to Collingwood, how was that experience? And obviously working with a young coach coming into the system.
Yeah, I thought, as it turned out, and because Geelong was the way they were, Hock had moved upstairs and was doing something in commercial, and he was a very good footy administrator. So I sort of saw that. I'd been driving down there for 8 years, and I thought I knew it was going to finish eventually. I don't know why I decided it. But I could see that they were in a good position, and I wasn't going to hurt them. And Scotty was doing well, and it was obvious that Hock would come down and run footy. So I wasn't giving up on them because I felt a lot of responsibility towards them. So then I thought, this is just another opportunity to do something else. And I've always been, a real fan of Bucks, He played in Adelaide. I coached him in a state game once, and that, you know, as a player and administrator, I'd worked with him a lot. So I felt that I could help him. Maybe didn't help him all that much, as it turns out. But I can't say I didn't enjoy it. The players were terrific, and the organisation was good, and Bucks was good. But it sort of finished up a bit unpleasant in the end. But they're a bit like that, the Pies, sometimes.
What did you see of Bucks that was positive and probably more because he's evolved dramatically?
Yeah.
But what did you see that you felt like you had to try and help him the most with to get him? Because it's when you've seen a premiership, I always say it's like climbing Mount Everest. You know, it's sort of like, well, you know where to go, but it's trying to keep the blokes on track with you rather than wandering off here and there. So you've seen, Balmey, you've been to the top of the mountain. What was sort of hard for you to go and work with a young coach where you thought, I wish he would do that?
No, there wasn't too much that was a problem. I thought it was more just encouraging him and helping him and letting him think he knows what he's doing. Because the one thing that Bucks always had the ability to do was cope with what's next. Yeah. Even as a player, as a wonderful player that he was. I remember we made him captain one of the earlier times, and he sort of, well, what do I do as captain? And he sort of worked through it. I said, well, what you do is, you don't just be the best player you can be, help the other players be better players. That's what and he sort of took all that on, and he worked through it, and you could always see that he was looking for the next thing. He was really, he was sort of named Fig Jam, and that wasn't really that fair. When you look at the sort of person that he is, he was just so bloody good is the problem. But no, I think he's I really enjoyed working. I think he started to really believe in himself and the way they're playing. I think they're in a pretty good position at the moment, apart from not playing, because none of us are playing. But I think they're really strong. I think he's done a really good job.
And then you back to Richmond?
Yes.
And
yes.
That's been remarkable.
It has, isn't it?
A remarkable turnaround too.
Yes. A little bit like Geelong, they'd probably done a fair bit of the work to organise themselves before I got there in 7, and so I take the credit for it. It's a little bit the same Richmond. But they were in a reasonably good place. But we didn't really know what to expect out of 17. It was a miracle in the end. They were wonderful. But I look at it and you try to relate it to footy. I think we had the best team that I've ever seen, as in terms of playing as a team.
Yeah.
Because I looked at it, I even watched the prelim final of 17 the other day, just watched a bit of it again. I thought, how the hell did we win that? Because GWS were plenty of good players, and Jack wasn't getting a kick up forward, and there was no other key forward. How the hell did we kick enough? But the team stuff was wonderful, and I think Richmond are better now than they were then in terms of capability. It's a matter of whether we get all that team again. I think we will. But no, it was fantastic. They were really, Damien really. He went to Harvard and did this crazy course, which told him to be more childlike, which seems a ridiculous thing to say, but it just said, be who you are. Because I think what he'd done, you would have seen it, that he decided that in 16 or whatever, that he needed to tell everyone what they were doing wrong to give themselves a chance to be any good. And all of a sudden he kind of lost the trust, because there you go, all he's doing is telling me I'm no good. And it was he thought for the right reasons, and then he came back to, well, what am I? I'm an encourager. I want to encourage people to be their best. I'm a growth coach. I'm not a negative coach. So he really started to do that, and they really trusted him and believed in him.
And I've always felt that Trent Cotchin was maligned early.
Yes,
I've watched from the outside and felt like the club caught up to Trent.
Yes,
in terms of he's
a
caring, thoughtful, relationship folk, but on the field he's the fiercest competitor in the world.
Yes,
and it felt like the club almost caught.
We'll almost forgive everyone for being themselves. Be who you are, and we'll deal with it. And that's kind of him in a way, isn't it? Yeah.
I think you've seen, in my view, you've seen the evolution of 3 people in particular. Damien, you touched on, from what I believe was a real stats-orientated coach, and you have to present stats, to more relationship.
Yeah.
But 2 of the best evolution I've seen from players is Trent Cotchin and Jack Riewoldt. Riewolt's transformation, and I touched on a lot last year.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Yeah.
His transformation is seen as a petulant, selfish, individual player. And I think you've got the 2 most selfless players in the competition now in Trent Cotchin and Jack Riewoldt. So through your eyes, tell us about their journey.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, Jack was interesting because when I first get there, there's what do we do with all these blokes? And there was even suggestion, well, should we keep Jack?
Yeah.
And we're always going to. But so I sat with him a few times. We had a few discussions and talked. And I came back and said, he's got all the right answers. He says the right stuff. He believes the right stuff. He wants the right stuff. Yeah. We've just got to make sure that that's what we're valuing with him and we're challenging him on. If he doesn't, well, we'll say, hang on, that wasn't that. And I think that was all he kind of needed. I mean, because he is quite, believes in himself. He's quite driven. He's outspoken about that sort of all sorts of things. So we've got to make sure that we give him his voice, but we also hold him to account if he doesn't quite do that, which is what we've all been able to do, and him more than us, because it's more about what he wants out of himself. But no, it's been not so much a turnaround, but it's what he's shown. And, like he tapping the ball to play. He's doing stuff that he wouldn't have done that before. Yeah. It's quite amazing. Yeah.
But I think what you're saying is absolutely right.
We said he can sing with the Killers if he plays well.
But it's funny you should say, because people ask me a lot about, those sort of outlier players. Most players want direction. Most players just want to be held accountable.
Yeah, what do you value
in me? What do you value?
Yeah.
And I think that's a great point that you've said, and it seems to me, I remember going to watch Richmond a lot when I was working the radio. They played a lot of Sunday games in 17, and I reckon it was about round 15 or 16, and I remember getting in the car going to the MCG, and I thought to myself, I actually trust the Tigers today. I know what I'm going to get from the Tigers. How important is that accountability, reward and challenge, and also the ability to get a group together and trust? Because that to me was defining at the back end of 2017.
Well, that's all we got, isn't it? I mean, if you might have all the good players and you might be able to get away with them just being good players, but it's rare that happens because the equality of the system, you're not going to be the case. So how well you work together determines everything. I was watching something yesterday. Lisa Alexander, the girl who coached the Diamonds, netball, talking about. She was talking. They said, "Well, why are you guys so good?" And she said, in a way, it's because there's such competition for places in our program." And I'm sort of sitting there saying, and then she said, and essentially she said, we select based on the values, their adherence to the values that they've agreed to. Yeah. And then she went on to say, and if you're a really talented dickhead, she didn't say dickhead, but she meant, so girls can't be dickheads, can they? Well, I don't know.
So we'll let that
one go. They won't get through the program. And to me, that's what determines what they are not, and the competition for places, but it's how you choose them. Those in power, who have the power, do they actually live to that? And that's exactly what we're saying, and that's the same with Jack and everyone. That's how we came together in 17. Everyone, they just work together so well, and they're able to say what they think. They're able to have disagreements, but agree to what we're going to do on the field. It was actually, there's a funny story. We had we're deciding on the leadership at the first place, and we needed Trent to be captain because of all the qualities that he had, and it was obvious that Rancy and Jack were the next two, and they were in their particular. It worked really well, and so we worked through getting the players to vote. So we voted on all sorts of things, and because of who Jack is, he didn't quite get the support the others did, but it was still very, very strong. And I remember we're sitting in a meeting. It was just Rancy and Trent and Damien or whatever, and Jack, and he says, all I want to know is which of the bastards didn't vote for me. Which is quite funny. And then Rancy said, well, I didn't vote for you. But he said, and he half joked about it. And I thought, oh, God, where's this going? And so I had a light glow moment. I said, this is the best day of our lives. We're sitting in a room with people that we love and trust, and they're prepared to say what they think. Yeah. This is, we're going somewhere. All right.
And look, it's probably a great way to wrap it up, and I'm going to give you the final word, Murph. But before I do, to sum everything up, you've learned in so many years of being involved in sport and business as well. If you were appointing a coach, give me the characteristics. What are the non-negotiables that you're putting into that coach?
Yeah, it's a really challenging question because he's got to be so many things. If, in my view, well, he's got to know the game, but he doesn't have to be an absolute expert in the game. But he's got to know it well enough, and he's got to be prepared to he has to have the intellect to be able to know what he doesn't know. But I think most important thing nowadays is his control of his own ego is the biggest challenge of it all. Because if you just coach for you, and you could be very good, but if you just coach for you, you're not coaching for us in a way. And sometimes it's hard to judge that. But I think that's more important than everything else, personally.
Yeah, great answer. Murph, the final...
I've got a couple.
Yep.
You've been in many successful organisations over the journey, Balmey. What are the commonalities? What are the 2 or 3 things you reckon that are really important for if you're a CEO watching this? What do you have to have? What is got to be there in order for
team first and trust? If you got both of those, you got a chance of being as good as you can be.
And what's trust look like for you, though? I know you've heard me say that before.
Well, do what you say you're going to do.
Okay.
It's almost as simple as that. If you and trust is around the ego control thing as well, because I mean sometimes we'll get carried away with ourselves, and all of a sudden you're just protecting your own position.
Yeah.
And again, the organisation's got to be good enough so that you don't have to do that as well. And that sometimes we create something no good because we, well, shit, if I don't do this, I'm going, or these I can't trust these dickheads up there, so I got to behave this way. So that's why the trust has got to be from the top down. Yeah. And that doesn't mean, like quite often we talk about our game too and say, I mean, it's obviously you're all soft. No, we're driven to be as good as we can be. We got to be challenged. We got to be able to. They got to inspire people to da 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 da. But within it, there's that human part of it. Yeah. So we still got to do all that, and it doesn't mean we're not having to make the hard decisions. In this time when we got no money to spend, supposedly, our leaders are going to make decisions on people's lives. Terrible. They hate it, but they have to do it. Yeah. So it's that you still have to have that. Yeah, the duty of leadership. You got to have that. Like I think. Someone said the other day that in footy, this is not a good time for leadership because it's horrible. But it's the most crucial time for leadership, and our leadership is so crucial. But it's not much fun. There's a lot of stuff you're going to be doing you don't actually want to do, but we have to make a decision for us, not for you.
And what's... Sorry, you're going to pick up on that?
No.
I was going to say, what advice would you give to a young Neil Balme? Now, sitting back, what would you...
Get your friggin' haircut. I don't know. I'd just say, have a go, mate, and enjoy it. A bit more than you think you know. Don't forget there's a lot of other people involved, not just you, but I don't think I needed to be told that too much. You stick to footy, you're going to really enjoy it. Having said that, if I hadn't have stuck to footy, I'm sure I would have been okay doing something else. But I didn't really realise how much I love footy until I started footy. I mean, and it's terrific, really good fun. Great people. People are wonderful.
I always say, Roosie, this man lives values, culture, leadership as much as anyone I've ever met in my life. Like,
that's a lovely thing to say. Thank you.
He practices it and he delivers on his word, and that's why he embodies the trust that people give to him, I think.
Yeah, great way to wrap it up, Murph.
Oh, thank you. No, it's been great fun.
Been an amazing discussion.
And I'm going to meditate more, Tammy, if you're listening.
And I think that I just want to finish on the last, because you've summed it up beautifully. I think for Balmey, looking from afar, and we've had a little bit to do with each other, but the journey's been incredible. And I think I can't stress enough for people that haven't seen Balmey play. He would have been seen as this hard-ass player that would have naturally transitioned into being a hard-ass admin, hard-ass, but it couldn't be further from the truth. So anyone that speaks about Balmey talks about walking the walk. What are the values? What are the behaviours? How does he act? And to your credit, not enough leaders do that, and we know. But I want to pick up on a couple of points to finish off. Ego kills organisations, and you touched on it. I think that's a great answer. And
well, if you haven't got ego, you're no good. But if you're not in control of your ego, you're worse than no good.
Exactly. Ego, exactly when it goes. And under pressure, do you do what's best for yourself or what's best for the team? And I think any decisions that are made through this period, whether it's the AFL, whether it's companies, are you doing what's best for yourself or are you doing what's best for the team? And I reckon that's a great way to sum it up. So, Balmey, Murph, unbelievable, great discussion, great hour.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Murph.
fantastic
No, I
journey.
loved
Thanks,
it.
mate.
Really good.
Really
Thank you.
good fun.
And hopefully everyone enjoyed the Culture Couch. We'll see you next time.